In our digital world, there's this entire workforce that's operating completely in the shadows. Now, it's not human, but it powers literally everything from our cloud services to our CI/CD pipelines. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on this invisible workforce to figure out what it is and, more importantly, how we can secure it.
Let's just kick things off with a number that should really make you stop and think. 45 to 1. What is that? Well, that's the estimated ratio of non-human identities to human ones on a typical network. Yeah, that's a staggering figure, and it points to this massive and, frankly, often overlooked part of our entire infrastructure.
So let's actually define what we mean by this invisible digital workforce. These are the engines that power modern business. But as we're about to see, they also create this rapidly expanding attack surface that a lot of organizations are only just now starting to get their heads around. So what exactly is a non-human identity, or NHI? Well, to put it simply, it's any entity that isn't a person but still needs to prove who it is to get things done. We're talking about applications, microservices, automated scripts, bots, all of them performing tasks without any human ever touching them. You should really think of them as the digital employees of your organization. And where do these NHIs do their jobs? They operate inside what we call workloads. So if NHIs are the employees, then workloads are their offices and their factories. We're talking about the digital workhorses here, custom APIs, databases, deployment scripts, the stuff that forms the absolute backbone of your operations. Now, to secure these workloads, we've got to get really clear on two critical concepts: identity and access. A great way to think about this is like a passport versus a visa. Identity, that's the passport. It proves who or what something is. But access, that's the visa. It defines exactly what that entity is allowed to do and where. Getting this separation right is, well, it's everything. It's fundamental to building a secure system. And this brings us to a huge security challenge. All of these non-human identities, they create this vast and often completely invisible attack surface. I mean, for decades, we've been laser-focused on securing human users, right? But this digital workforce has become a massive blind spot. So what makes these NHIs such a juicy target for attackers? Well, for starters, they often have highly privileged access just by default. Their credentials might be shared across entire teams. And think about it, they have zero human intuition to spot something that feels a little fishy. And because they operate at machine speed, a breach can escalate in seconds across these vast interconnected systems. I know it might sound a bit dramatic, but the threat is so real. A single, forgotten script with some hard-coded credentials buried inside it can become the one tiny foothold an attacker needs to own everything. Let's look at a real-world example where this exact scenario played out. In the 2022 Uber breach, this is precisely what happened. An attacker found a PowerShell script, a non-human identity, with admin credentials hard-coded right there in plain text. From that one little script, they gained access to Uber's most critical internal systems, including their AWS console and virtual machines. It was a textbook, absolute failure of NHI security. And look, Uber isn't some isolated case. This has become a pattern. We've seen major breaches at CircleCI, Sumo Logic, and Cloudflare, and they all stemmed from compromised workload credentials, stolen keys, and service tokens that were never rotated. This is truly one of the most pressing threats in cybersecurity today. Okay, so now let's add another layer of complexity and opportunity: artificial intelligence. AI is a true double-edged sword in this space. It's dramatically amplifying the threat, for sure, but it's also becoming an absolutely essential part of the defense. On the one hand, attackers are using AI to build way smarter malware and much more convincing phishing attacks that can fool even really robust systems. But on the defense side, we're using AI for advanced behavioral analytics to spot anomalies in machine-to-machine traffic that a human could never, ever catch. It can also automate threat responses at machine speed, isolating a compromised workload instantly. But here's the real twist. AI isn't just a tool here. Autonomous AI agents are becoming a new, highly advanced category of non-human identity all by themselves. They make decisions, they request access, and they perform actions. And that means they need their own robust identity and risk management framework to prevent them from being misused. Ultimately, you can't fight machine speed threats with human speed defenses. It just doesn't work. AI-driven tools are now essential for continuously verifying identities and enforcing security principles at a scale we just can't match, making sure trust is never just assumed, but is always proven. So how in the world do we get control of this incredibly complex environment? Well, fortunately, there's a blueprint. Modern frameworks and principles have been designed specifically for this machine-driven world we now live in. The foundation of that blueprint is zero trust. The philosophy is incredibly simple, but so powerful. Never trust, always verify. It doesn't matter if a request is coming from inside or outside your network. No user, no device, no workload is trusted by default. Every single request for access has to be authenticated and authorized, period. So if zero trust is the philosophy, what's the practical tool? It's something called Workload Identity and Access Management, or Workload IAM. And honestly, the simplest way to think about it is this. It's like Okta, but for machines. Instead of managing human identities, it manages all that workload-to-workload access. And this technology, it enables a really fundamental shift in thinking. Just like Cameron Techia from Snowflake says, it allows you to move from the incredibly dangerous game of managing secrets and credentials to the much, much safer model of managing access based on a verified identity. Now, for managing the specific risks that AI brings to the table, we can use established frameworks like the one from NIST. It gives us a really structured way to handle the problem. First, you govern by building a risk-aware culture. Then, you map the context to identify all the risks. Next, you measure and track those risks. And finally, you manage them by taking action based on their potential impact. Simple.
Okay, so this all leads to one core takeaway. The modern security paradigm for all these non-human identities, it requires a complete mental shift away from how we've always done things.
The goal is so simple and yet so profound. Manage access, not secrets. Seriously, if you remember one thing from all of this, this should be it. Your primary job is no longer to protect and rotate a sprawling list of secret keys and tokens. Your job is to manage who or what has access to your resources based on a constantly verified identity. Let's just contrast the two approaches so it's crystal clear. The old way relied on static secrets, keys, tokens that were manually rotated and often just hard-coded into scripts, just like in the Uber breach. The new way is all about managing access. It uses dynamic, short-lived credentials that are issued just in time based on a verified identity and governed by a central policy. It's just a fundamentally more secure model. So we'll end with this question. In an age where machines outnumber humans 45-1 on your network, can you confidently say you know who or what has the keys to your kingdom? Thanks for joining this explainer.